totally a man of nature, and in that he was kind of a wild man.
For 9 seasons, the Waltons looked like one of the happiest families on television. But behind the wholesome stories and famous goodnights, several cast members faced situations that changed their careers in ways most viewers never knew about. So why did these beloved actors really leave the Waltons? And what was happening behind the scenes when they did? Join us as we uncover the real reasons these actors left the Waltons and reveal the stories that were hidden for years. Richard Thomas. Richard Thomas became one of the most recognizable young actors on American television almost overnight when the Waltons premiered in 1972. He was just 21 years old when he took on the role of John Boy Walton, the eldest son of the Walton family, and the character who often guided viewers through the family's life. John Boy was more than one of the children. He was the show's narrator, an aspiring writer, and one of its main emotional centers. Thomas quickly became closely associated with the character, and by 1973, he had won a Primetime Emmy Award for his performance. At first, the success seemed like everything a young actor could want. Thomas had a major television role, critical recognition, and millions of viewers watching him every week. But behind that success, he was starting to think about what would happen to his career if he stayed on the show for too long. Thomas was not someone who had entered acting without a clear idea of what he wanted. He had stage training and had studied at Columbia University before his television career became successful. He was interested in acting beyond the weekly routine of a family television drama. In particular, he wanted the chance to explore film and other types of roles. That created a difficult problem. The better Thomas became known as John Boy, the harder it became to imagine him as anyone else. Viewers knew him as the quiet young man from Walton's Mountain who wanted to become a writer. His gentle personality, narration, and journal-writing ambitions were central to the character. But for Thomas, that success also raised a serious concern. Would audiences eventually stop seeing Richard Thomas and only see John Boy? By the time he reached his mid-20s, that concern had become strong enough to influence his decision about the future. After the 5th season, in 1977, Thomas decided that he would not return for the 6th season. He was not fired, forced out, or removed because of a dispute with the production. He made the decision himself because he believed remaining on the series could limit the kind of career he wanted to build. The writers had an important job to do after Thomas made his decision. John Boy was too important to simply disappear without an explanation. Fortunately, the character already had an established dream of becoming a writer, so the show had a natural way to write him out. John Boy moved to New York City to pursue his writing career. The storyline made sense because it followed something viewers already knew about him. He had always wanted to write, and leaving Walton's Mountain for New York allowed the character to continue pursuing that goal. The producers also kept the door open for Thomas to return. They did not completely close John Boy's story, leaving room for the character to come back later if Thomas changed his mind. But the series still had to continue without its original John Boy. Eventually, Robert Whiteman was brought in to play the character. Whiteman took over the role for the 8th and 9th seasons. He was a capable actor, but replacing Thomas was never going to be simple. John Boy had been closely connected to Thomas's performance from the very beginning, and the character's importance changed after Thomas left. The show continued by giving more attention to other members of the Walton family and developing different storylines. Still, the absence of the original John Boy was noticeable. Thomas had been the narrator, and one of the main figures viewers followed from the start, so removing him naturally changed the balance of the series. For Thomas, however, leaving meant having the freedom to explore other work. He went on to perform on Broadway and appeared in films and television movies during the late 1970s and 1980s. He continued building a respected career, but the major film career he had imagined when he left the Waltons never developed exactly as he had expected. And Richard Thomas wasn't the only major Waltons star whose career took an unexpected turn. Will Geer. Will Geer was already an experienced actor long before he became Grandpa Zebulon Walton on The Waltons. When the series premiered in 1972, audiences quickly came to know him as the warm, outspoken grandfather who sat with his family, shared stories, and helped hold the Walton household together. Grandpa Zeb was funny, stubborn, affectionate, and deeply connected to the values of family and community. But the man playing him had lived through a much more difficult chapter of American history. Long before the Waltons, Geer had become involved in political and social causes during the Depression era. He supported labor organizing, took part in civil rights efforts, and became involved with left-wing political groups. He was also a close friend of folk singer Woody Guthrie. These activities were not simply private opinions for Geer. They were part of his public life and professional identity at a time when political beliefs could have serious consequences for people working in Hollywood. That became especially important when the House Un-American Activities Committee, commonly known as HUAC, began investigating alleged communist influence in American entertainment. In 1951, Geer was called to testify before the committee. He refused to cooperate. At the time, that decision could have devastating professional consequences. Geer was blacklisted, which effectively shut him out of mainstream Hollywood work. For an actor, this was an enormous blow. Film and television were becoming increasingly important parts of American entertainment, but Geer suddenly found himself unable to work normally within those industries. Instead of appearing regularly in major productions, he spent more than a decade finding work wherever he could. He performed on stage, worked in smaller venues, and became involved with community theater. The period lasted for years. Geer had not suddenly lost his ability to act. He had not stopped being talented. His professional opportunities had been restricted because of his political history and his refusal to cooperate with the committee. That makes his eventual role on The Waltons particularly interesting. When viewers saw Grandpa Zeb sitting with his family and talking about surviving difficult times, they were watching an actor who had already experienced a major professional struggle of his own. He had lost years of mainstream work and had been forced to find other ways to continue his career. Yet there was no need for Geer to explain all of that every week on television. Instead, he played a grandfather who represented stability, family, and determination. Grandpa Zeb was part of a fictional family trying to survive the Great Depression, while Geer had personally experienced a very different kind of hardship during his own lifetime. The contrast was striking. By the time The Waltons premiered, Geer was in his late 60s. The role gave him a level of mainstream recognition that had been taken away from him years earlier. After spending so long outside the center of Hollywood, he was suddenly appearing in millions of American homes every week. Geer remained with the Waltons through the 5th season, but his story would end in a way that had nothing to do with disagreements over the show or a desire to pursue another career. Will Geer died on April 22, 1978, at the age of 76. His death came while the series was still being produced, leaving the writers with the difficult task of dealing with the permanent loss of Grandpa Walton. Rather than inventing an elaborate storyline to explain why the character had simply disappeared, the series allowed Grandpa Walton to die between seasons. And his story was only one of several deeply personal struggles hiding behind the Walton family's cheerful goodnights. Ellen Corby. Ellen Corby had already built an impressive acting career long before she became Grandma Esther Walton on The Waltons. She had worked as a character actress for decades, with a film career that reached back to the 1940s. She was also an Academy Award nominee for her performance in I Remember Mama, showing that her reputation as an actress had been established long before television audiences knew her as Grandma Walton. When The Waltons premiered in 1972, Corby brought years of experience to the role. Grandma Walton quickly became one of the show's most memorable characters. She had a sharp personality and a dry sense of humor, and she could often communicate exactly what she was thinking with very little dialogue. Her scenes with Will Geer's Grandpa Zeb were especially important to the show's family dynamic. The two characters had a natural connection that made the Walton grandparents feel like a real married couple, rather than simply two older characters added to the family. Audiences responded strongly to Corby's performance, and so did the television industry. She won 3 Primetime Emmy Awards for playing Grandma Walton, receiving the awards in 1973, 1976, and 1977. That level of recognition showed just how important her performance had become to the series. Then, in November 1976, everything changed. Corby suffered a severe stroke at the age of 66 while The Waltons was still in production. The stroke seriously affected her speech and mobility. Suddenly, the question was not simply whether she could continue playing Grandma Walton in the same way. The demanding schedule of a weekly television series required long hours, memorizing dialogue, and the ability to perform consistently. After such a serious medical emergency, it was uncertain whether Corby would be able to return at all. The production could have handled the situation in several ways. The writers could have removed Grandma Walton from the story, sent her character away to visit relatives, or quietly reduced her presence without directly addressing what had happened. Instead, they chose a much more direct approach. Grandma Walton suffered a stroke in the show's storyline as well. That decision meant Corby's real medical situation was not simply hidden from the audience. Her character's condition became part of the Walton family's story. Viewers saw the family dealing with the consequences of a stroke, including the fear and uncertainty that came with it. This also allowed the writers to adjust the role around Corby's actual condition rather than expecting her to immediately return to the same workload she had handled before. Her recovery became part of the story, and the character could continue existing within the family even though Corby could no longer perform exactly as she had before. Corby eventually returned to the Waltons beginning with the 7th season. However, things were different. Her appearances were more limited, and the production had to work within the physical effects left by the stroke. For viewers who had known Grandma Walton as an active and sharp-tongued presence, those changes were noticeable. But Corby remained part of the series. She continued appearing during the later seasons and eventually returned for the Waltons reunion movies that followed the original series. There is something particularly difficult about watching those later appearances once the circumstances are known. Grandma Walton was still the same character the audience had come to love, but the actress playing her had gone through a life-changing medical emergency. What viewers saw on screen was not simply a fictional storyline about a family member recovering from a stroke. It was closely connected to what Ellen Corby herself had experienced. And Grandma Walton's story was about to become even more complicated, because Ellen Corby wasn't the only major Waltons actress whose health would dramatically change her role. Michael Learned. Michael Learned became one of the defining faces of the Waltons when she took on the role of Olivia Walton, the mother at the center of the family. Olivia was patient, hardworking, principled, and deeply devoted to her children. But she was not written as a perfect mother, who never became tired or frustrated. Learned gave her a quiet strength, while also showing the pressure that came with raising a large family during the Depression. That made Olivia feel like a real person, rather than simply a symbol of motherhood. The television industry clearly recognized what Learned was doing. She won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a drama series 4 times for her performance as Olivia Walton. Her wins came in 1973, 1974, 1976, and 1979. 4 Emmy Awards for the same character was an extraordinary achievement, especially for an actress working on the same television series year after year. That makes what happened next surprising. After 7 seasons, Learned decided to leave the Waltons. Why would an actress walk away from one of the most successful family dramas on television after receiving 4 Emmys for the role? The answer was not a feud, a scandal, or a sudden dislike of the people around her. She was exhausted. Producing a weekly television drama was an enormous commitment. The Waltons required roughly 9 to 10 months of production each year. Learned had spent 7 consecutive seasons working under that kind of schedule. That meant a huge portion of her year was controlled by filming, rehearsals, preparation, travel, and the constant demands that came with being one of the show's central performers. For an audience watching 1 episode a week, it was easy to forget how much work went into creating those episodes. The actors had to keep returning to the same demanding schedule for months at a time. For Learned, the workload had eventually become too much. Her decision was not about rejecting Olivia Walton. She also did not appear to be rejecting the people she had worked with. In later years, she continued to speak warmly about her castmates and her experience on the show. Her problem was the amount of time and energy the production was taking from her life. After 7 seasons, she wanted something different. She wanted to work on other projects and have more control over what she did professionally. She also wanted time away from the television set. The constant production schedule had consumed years of her life, and she needed the chance to step back and recover some of the time and energy that had been taken up by the series. That is an important distinction. Learned was not leaving because the Waltons had failed. She was leaving because it had succeeded so much that remaining on the show required a commitment she no longer wanted to make. The writers then had to find a way to explain Olivia's absence. Their solution was tuberculosis. In the story, Olivia Walton contracted tuberculosis and had to leave Walton's Mountain to receive treatment at a sanitarium. It gave the character a serious but believable reason to be away from her family for an extended period. More importantly, it did not require the writers to destroy Olivia's character or suggest that she had simply abandoned her family. The storyline also kept the door open for Learned to return. And she did. Learned eventually returned to the Waltons for later appearances, and she also came back for the reunion movies that followed the original series. Her willingness to return showed that leaving the regular cast did not mean she had turned her back on the show or the people who had been part of her life for so many years. Her departure becomes even more interesting when compared with Richard Thomas. Thomas left after the 5th season because he was worried that John Boy Walton would become the only role audiences could see him playing. He wanted to expand his acting career and explore opportunities beyond the series. His concern was about where the show might take his professional future. Learned had a different problem. She was not primarily worried that Olivia Walton would prevent her from becoming another kind of actress. She was tired of the production itself. After years of working for most of the year on the same demanding series, she wanted to regain control of her time and have a life that was not completely organized around television. That difference matters because it shows why the departures from the Waltons cannot all be explained by one simple reason. Some actors wanted new opportunities. Others faced serious health problems. Some were forced away by circumstances they could not control. In Learned's case, even 4 Emmy Awards were not enough to make her continue with a schedule that had become too demanding. And there was another major Walton star whose exit was caused by circumstances far more personal than career ambition. Patricia Neal. Patricia Neal was supposed to play Olivia Walton before Michael Learned ever took the role. That detail changes the story of the Waltons because the mother viewers came to know was not originally meant to be played by Learned at all. The role had first been offered to an actress who was already one of Hollywood's most respected dramatic performers. Neal had built a major career before the Waltons came along. She was an acclaimed actress and had won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance in HUD. She had the kind of experience that made her a natural choice for a central family role. Earl Hamner Jr., the creator of the Waltons, specifically wanted Neal to play Olivia Walton. He believed she had the grounded and strong quality needed to hold the Walton family together without making the character feel overly dramatic. But there was something in Patricia Neal's past that would make taking on a demanding television series extremely difficult. In February 1965, while she was pregnant with her fifth child, Neal suffered 3 massive strokes in rapid succession. She was only 39 years old. The medical emergency dramatically changed her life. She was left partially paralyzed and experienced serious problems with speech and other abilities. Her recovery required extensive rehabilitation and years of work. For an actress who had already reached the highest level of the film industry, this could easily have ended her career. But Neal fought her way back to acting. Her recovery was remarkable, and she eventually returned to professional work. In 1968, only a few years after the strokes, she received an Academy Award nomination for her performance in The Subject Was Roses. That achievement demonstrated that the strokes had not taken away her ability to perform. She was still a talented and respected actress, and she had managed to return to an industry that could have easily moved on without her. However, returning to acting was not the same thing as being physically ready for every type of acting job. That became important when The Waltons was being developed. A weekly television drama demanded a very different kind of commitment from an individual film performance. The production schedule could run for most of the year. Actors had to learn large amounts of dialogue, work long hours, and maintain a consistent level of performance from one episode to the next. For someone who had experienced multiple major strokes and was still dealing with their physical consequences, that schedule presented serious challenges. Neal ultimately withdrew from the project before filming began. Michael Learned was then brought in to play Olivia Walton, and audiences eventually came to associate the character completely with her. Learned would go on to make Olivia one of the most important characters on the show, winning 4 Primetime Emmy Awards for the role. But that version of Olivia only existed because Patricia Neal could not take the job. There is an interesting question in that fact, although it is important not to take it too far. We can never know exactly what the Waltons would have looked like with Neal playing Olivia. Her performance would have been different. Her chemistry with the other actors would have been different, and the character might have developed in ways nobody could predict. What we do know is that Earl Hamner Jr. had wanted Neal for the role, and her health ultimately made the demanding production schedule unrealistic. That makes Neal's departure very different from the decisions made by actors who simply wanted to leave a successful show. She did not walk away because she had lost interest in acting. She did not leave because she wanted to escape the character, and she certainly did not lack ambition. She had already demonstrated how badly she wanted to return to her profession by rebuilding her career after a devastating medical crisis. The problem was that her body had gone through something far more serious than a normal career setback. The strokes had changed what she could realistically take on, even though they had not destroyed her talent. There is also something especially striking about the timing. Neal suffered her strokes in 1965, 7 years before the Waltons premiered. She had spent those years recovering and proving that she could still work. Yet, when the opportunity to play Olivia came along, the demands of a weekly television series were still too much. So the actress who was originally supposed to become Olivia Walton never appeared on the show at all. Instead, Michael Learned stepped into the role and created the version of Olivia that millions of viewers would eventually know. Patricia Neal continued her own career elsewhere, but the Waltons' opportunity belonged to someone else because of a medical event she had survived years earlier. And there was another Walton actor whose story shows just how difficult growing up on this famous show could become. Kami Coulter and John Walmsley. Kami Coulter and John Walmsley took very different paths after the Waltons, but neither story is really about failure. Both actors spent years on the series, yet when it was time to decide what came next, they chose lives that reflected what they actually wanted, rather than simply staying in entertainment because it was familiar. Kami Coulter played Elizabeth Walton, the youngest of the Walton children. When the Waltons began in 1972, Coulter was only 6 years old. By the time the series ended in 1981, she was 15. That means almost her entire childhood was spent working on a nationally watched television show. That was a very unusual childhood. While other children were going to school, spending time with friends, and slowly figuring out who they wanted to become. Coulter was growing up on a television set. Her childhood was being filmed and watched by millions of people. She became recognizable to viewers at an age when most children had no idea what career they might want as adults. Being part of a successful television series could easily have encouraged Coulter to keep acting after The Waltons ended. She already had something many young actors spend years trying to achieve: a recognizable role and years of professional experience. But Coulter chose something very different. After the series ended, she went to college instead of immediately searching for another major acting role. Eventually, she became a teacher. That decision is important because it does not appear to have been a failed attempt to remain in Hollywood. She simply chose not to make acting the center of her adult life. For someone who had spent so much of her childhood in entertainment, stepping away from the industry gave her the chance to build an identity that was not based on Elizabeth Walton. She could pursue education, develop a professional life away from cameras, and make choices without having to worry about maintaining a career as a former child star. Coulter's story also shows how different her priorities were from what people might expect from a young actor who had already found success. Instead of chasing another television role, she left the entertainment world almost completely and moved toward teaching. John Walmsley took a different route. He played Jason Walton, the musical member of the Walton family. Jason was often shown playing instruments, particularly the guitar and piano, and music was an important part of his character. That was not simply something created for the television series. Walmsley had genuine musical interests outside acting. His connection to music continued beyond the role, and unlike Richard Thomas, he did not leave the Waltons in the middle of its run. Walmsley stayed with the series for all 9 seasons. That is an important difference. Thomas left after season 5 because he wanted to expand his acting career and feared that continuing as John Boy could make it harder for audiences to accept him in other roles. Walmsley made the opposite choice. He stayed until the show ended, then gradually moved toward the area that had already interested him throughout his acting career. After the Waltons, Walmsley became increasingly involved in music composition and production. His career therefore moved away from acting and toward music. In his case, leaving the entertainment spotlight did not mean abandoning creativity. It meant focusing on a different form of creative work. Cotler did not need another television role to prove that she had succeeded. Walmsley did not need to remain an actor simply because audiences knew him as Jason. And Thomas's decision to leave was not the only way to search for something beyond the show. For Cotler and Walmsley especially, what happened after the Waltons ended suggests that walking away from acting can sometimes be a deliberate decision to build a life around something else. Their time on the series gave them an unusual childhood and professional experience, but it did not have to determine what they would do for the rest of their lives. And while some cast members chose new careers, others stayed and faced very different personal struggles behind the scenes. Which story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold Hollywood stories.